Somebody asked me in the comments if I could just chat about Black's Law Dictionary. So I thought I would, and it gives me an opportunity to talk about other extrajudicial sources of legal information. So, stuff that's not from the courts or from Parliament, commentaries. So we'll look at encyclopedias and what we call practitioner texts, and we can look at what their status is. Also, yeah, I've cut myself again. It's a sort of common thing, but I'm just not very good at shaving. So what is it? Well, it's an American book. It was produced in 1891 by William Henry Black. And as the name suggests, it's just a dictionary of legal words and phrases. It was aimed at sort of lay people and law students. And it still goes today. Currently, it's actually owned by a company called West. They're the people who run Westlaw, which is the sort of online legal database that everybody uses. They're actually owned by Reuters. And it's now edited by somebody called Brian Garner. He's a lexicologist, which I have to Google, and that's somebody who effectively writes dictionaries about words. He's done lots of things. So he's done he does the legal dictionary, but he also does a book on golf. So it's actually quite interesting. Luckily, the earlier editions are out of print, out of copyright now, so I can show you some quotes. So you literally just look up a phrase, and as you can see, you look up there, it gives a sort of definition using sort of quite flowery language, and sometimes links to some relevant cases. But it all seems very non-controversial. I mean, this came on the back of the Freedmen on the Land sovereign citizen thing. And it's weird that, sovereign citizens can understand it's an American law book, but, obviously it's not an English law book. But for instance, the birth certificate thing, well, that's the definition of birth certificate, according to Black's, is this. And, that seems fairly standard to me. But who uses these things? Well, like I say, generally speaking, they're aimed at lay people, but mainly law students. And there's a big debate as to whether they're even worth doing. There are English equivalents. We've got like a huge, big, posh one. But generally speaking, students, we use one called Osborne. And I bought that. And I have to say, it was a bit interesting reading, but 95% of it was just old arcane things that interesting to legal historians, but weren't very useful, in modern practice. And I have to say, I basically never actually used it because, you are being taught from, a greater level of detail than just a sort of one-sentence definition of an offence. And I've been asking around about this, and the general consensus is that people bought them in their first year of law school and then never actually looked at them. But they are interesting reading, and especially for sort of some of the older, obscure, like Latin terms and phrases and things. They are interesting historically. But they're not relied upon in court. I mean, the Supreme Court Library has one, but it has like copies of every book. It has all the student texts. But what other books do we use? Well, we use a lot of what we call practitioner texts. So, say for instance, in criminal law, there's a book called Archbold that you may have heard of. But it's not the only one. There's another book called Blackstone. And Archbold's more popular, but a lot of people prefer Blackstone. And it's a bit like the sort of, PC versus Mac thing. Just like, well, yeah, just because more people use it, we use the better one, or the more obscure one. But they're legal encyclopedias, and they just, they list bits of the relevant statutes, list some cases, and they provide some commentary. And, we have these in all sorts of different fields. Like, the civil one is called The White Book. There used to be a Green Book when we had two, separate ones for High Court and County Court, but now they've merged, so it's just The White Book. But then there are also specialist practitioner texts in different areas. Like there's Chitty on contracts, and that's just a big textbook about everything about contracts. Obviously, one I use a lot is Gatley on libel and slander. There are other sort of textbooks out there, but these are the main ones, and they come out annually, and then you get supplements sort of quarterly, and sometimes even weekly editions. You can actually get them in like loose leaf format. I mean, now it's all digital, so it's even easier to keep up to date. And also there are scholarly articles in journals like the New Law Journal. But how does this apply to the law? Well, you can sort of, if you're arguing a legal point, say, there's a really good article on this by Professor So-and-so in the New Law Journal, and he suggests this is the approach that should be taken, and, this is the interpretation. There used to be a rule that you couldn't actually cite an extrajudicial authority until after the author had died. That is no longer the case now, which is just as well, because when I did criminal law, I relied on a sentencing book by Professor Thomas, and he's a really nice guy. Someone wanted to push him down the stairs or anything. But yeah, we use these books all the time. But like I said, they are, they are guides, they are assistants. They're not the law. And the interesting thing is, they quite often get the law wrong. And I'll leave you with this one because this is one of my favourites, because I put the feelers out and said, remember all those cases where courts say things like, with respect to the authors of Archbold, they got that wrong, or with respect to the authors of the White Book, they got that wrong. Because, these are now, they're put together by teams of like editors and sort of, people who contribute. But this is just one I really, really like, because it was Lord Justice Jackson allowing an appeal on a case, because he said that the judge in the lower court had got it wrong because he had read something in the White Book and the White Book had got it wrong. But what's really, really brilliant is the person who wrote that in the White Book was Lord Justice Jackson, because he's one of the editors. So there you go. Hope that was interesting, useful, helpful, or whatever. If it was, please consider clicking the like button and possibly even subscribing.